Hey guys, and welcome to another video of the Age of Empires game mechanics video series. This video is all about gold generation in Age of Empires in post-imperial age. So with all technologies researched, with a focus on trade cards and trade cogs. We will have a look at the formulas behind trading, which determine the gold gain per card or cog trip, the time one trip takes, and the gold gain per minute per card or cog. We will examine the influence of the map size on trade, and also the effect of congestion in trade routes will be discussed. We will also compare the gold income rates of trading with the mining rates, the rates relics offer to the owner, and the rates a player can get gold by gathering and then selling other resources at the market. The Portuguese Feitoria and its gold generation will be analyzed too. And always keep in mind that whenever I mention time units in this video, like minute or second, I'm speaking about real time units on game speed normal. I've already made a video about time units in AoE, for which you can find the link in this video's description below. First, on ageofempires.fandom.com we can find the exact term for the amount of gold received by a single trip of one trade card between two markets. Let's call this term gold gain per card trip formula. It looks like that. There is one variable named D and one constant named map size in this formula. The map size constant is equal to the length of each of the four edges of the map being played. As we know, in AoE, length is measured in tiles. Of course, the length only depends on the map size chosen for the current map. There are 7 different map sizes. Tiny is the smallest map size, having dimensions of 120 x 120 tiles. Giant used to be the largest map size, having a size of 240 x 240 tiles, but since the release of the expansion The Forgotten, the largest map size is Ludicrous, having a size of 480 x 480 tiles. The D variable in the formula is equivalent to the distance between the two markets. To calculate the D variable, there is another formula. We call it distance formula, and it looks like that. This equation basically says that the distance between two markets is defined by the Euclidean distance of their closest points minus 1, because the trade card itself has a size of 1 tile. And to avoid the D variable from ever becoming 0 or negative, the formula assesses that it can never be smaller than 0.1. So, according to this formula, the distance between the blue market and all of these red markets here is 0.1. The distance between the blue market and these red markets is also 0.1. The distance between the blue market and these red markets is 1. Here the distance between the two markets is 2, now 3, now 4, and so on. The distance between the blue market and these red markets is the square root of 2, so approximately 1.41. Note that according to our formula, all of these red markets have the same D value to the blue market, because as mentioned, the distance between buildings is measured by finding the smallest possible distance between their edges. So in this case, this is 10 between the blue and all of the red markets. Also be aware that the distance between these two markets on this tiny map, and remember a tiny map has a length of 120 tiles, is not 120. According to the formula it is 111, so 120 minus 9. Think of it that way. The distance from this edge of the map to that edge of the map is 120. We lose 4 tiles because of the blue market's length, 4 tiles because of the red market's length, and 1 tile because the trade card itself has a size of 1 tile. So 120 minus 4 minus 4 minus 1, which is 111. Likewise, to get the largest possible distance between two markets on a tiny map, we calculate the square root of twice the square of 111, which roughly is 157 tiles. However, since in very few matches you have the possibility to create trade routes across the whole diagonals of a map, except in matches that you have won anyway, from now on I'm gonna presume that the maximal length of a trade route is equal to the length of the map's edge, or more accurately, the length of the map's edge minus 9. So, back to our trade formula. If we plot the formula in Excel for all map sizes, the graph looks like this. On the x-axis we have the length of the trade route, and on the y-axis we have the gold generated for each trip to the market of the trade partner and back to the own market. I think it doesn't surprise anyone that longer routes generate more gold per trip. But it actually could be a bit unexpected for some of you, at least it was for me, that a route with, let's say, a length of 100 tiles on a tiny map produces much more gold per trip than a route with the same length on a larger map. Using the formula, we can calculate that a route with a length of 100 tiles on a tiny map gives us 52 gold per card trip, and a route with the same length on a ludicrous map only gives us 23 gold, so not even half as much. Okay, now we know the amount of gold generated per card trip, but what we are actually looking for is not the gold generated per card trip, but the amount of gold generated per minute by one card. Hence, we don't only need the amount of gold generated per trip, but also the time it takes a card to travel to the other market and back to the own market. The distance to cover is 2 times D. D tiles to the other market and D tiles back to the own market. On game speed normal, a card with Caravan moves with 2.25 tiles per real-time second. Hence, the time needed is D times 2 divided by 2.25, or if we only want to use integers in our fraction, 8 divided by 9 times D seconds. So let's divide our gold gain per card trip formula by the time needed for one trip. This gives us this term. We can simplify it to this term and further to this term. This is the gold generated by one card per second on a route with distance D between both markets. Let's multiply this formula with 60 to get the gold generated per minute. We call this formula gold gain per minute per card formula. Before we plot this formula for all different map sizes, I want to add that I haven't found the exact formulas for the gold gain of trade cogs per trip and the rate per minute until now. Yet, based on tests I'm gonna present in a few minutes, I'm very sure that the formulas are equal to the ones for trade cards, except that all constants are approximately 30% higher. So I expect the formulas for trade cogs to look roughly like that. Now let's plot the gold gain per minute per card formula for all different map sizes in Excel. As we can see in the formula and the graph, no matter how short or long a trade route is, there is always a guaranteed gold production rate of 9.315 gold per minute for each card. Additionally, there is a gold per minute bonus of at most 31.05 gold per minute. How much of this bonus is granted depends on the percentage of the map's edge your trade route is covering. So if we take for the x-axis the percentage the trade route is covering of the map's edge instead of the absolute length of the trade route in tiles, and plot the gold that one card generates per minute now, the graph looks equivalent for all map sizes. As we can see, a trade card using a trade route covering an entire edge of the map will generate gold with the same rate for all map sizes, which is the basic 9.315 gold per minute plus the full length bonus of 31.05 gold per minute, which in total is 40.365 gold per minute. Likewise, a trade card using a trade route covering exactly half of an edge of the map will generate gold with the same rate for all map sizes as well, which is the basic 9.315 gold per minute plus the half length bonus of 31.05 gold per minute, which in total is 24.85 gold per minute. Okay, now we know that the gold per minute a card generates on a trade route only depends on the proportion of the trade route's length of the map's length. But is that the entire truth, and aren't there any obvious or hidden advantages or disadvantages of trade on large maps compared to trade on smaller maps? On the one hand, there is a very obvious disadvantage for players who are trading in larger maps, because if, for example, we want to get the full 40.365 gold per minute by creating a trade route covering one entire edge of the map, we need to cover 240 tiles on giant maps, but only 120 tiles on tiny maps. And obviously it's easier to protect 120 tiles from enemy raids than 240 tiles. But on the other hand, there are also two advantages of trade routes on large maps over trade routes on small maps. Firstly, as we found out earlier in this video, the maximal length of a trade route covering an entire edge of a tiny map won't be exactly 120 tiles, as we always lose 9 tiles because of the size of the markets and the trade card itself. It will be 120 minus 9, so 111 tiles. On a giant map, the maximal length of a trade route covering an entire edge of the map will be 240 minus 9, so 231 tiles. Obviously, the larger the map sizes, the less it will hurt to lose these 9 tiles. Using our formula, we can confirm that the route on the giant map generates gold approximately 3% faster than the route on the tiny map. On the tiny map we get approximately 38 gold per minute per card, while on the giant map we get approximately 39.2 gold per minute per card. Secondly, the shorter the trade route, the higher the degree of congestion and the amount of collisions happening every second between trade cards will be, which increases the time a card needs to cover the trade route and hence reduces its gold generation rate. Now let's have a look at how a strong congestion impacts the efficiency of trade routes in detail. In order to do so, I've run some tests. A few words regarding the test settings. I've chosen two different map sizes. Tiny, so 120 times 120 tiles, and giant, so 240 times 240 tiles. Not ludicrous, because it's a fairly uncommon map size in online games. I've aligned the markets and docks along one edge of the test map, but with a small distance to the respective edge to give the cards and cogs more space to move. There are no obstacles in the trade route other than the trade cards and cogs themselves. I've done tests with trade routes covering the whole length of the test map's edge and with trade routes covering half the length of the test map's edge. I've run the tests for 115, 30, 60, 90 and 120 trade cards or cogs respectively. Why 120? Isn't that too much? Here 120 doesn't necessarily mean that you have 120 trade units. It means that there are 120 trade units in this trade route, and since it's not uncommon to have around 60 cards or cogs, and in most cases the same trade route will be used by at least 2 players, I think 120 is a pretty reasonable upper limit for the number of trade units in one trade route. I've run most tests for at least 1 hour, but all of them for at least 30 minutes. All technologies are researched. First, let's see the results for trade cards and cogs on giant maps, with trade routes along the whole edge. A single trade cog generates gold at a much faster rate than a single trade card. As we can see, both suffer from congestion significantly, but while trade cogs lose 54% of their efficiency if you use 120 instead of 1, trade cards lose only 25% of their efficiency if you use 120 instead of a single one. So, since trade cogs are much more prone to congestion than trade cards, the latter are superior if there are more than approximately 82 trade units. Otherwise, the cogs win this comparison. Now let's see the test results for cards and cogs with trade routes along the whole edge, but this time on tiny maps. Single cards and cogs start only with a slightly worse gold generation rate than on giant maps, but are much more prone to congestion effects, since collisions occur more often if the available space is reduced. This time trade cogs lose almost 70% of their efficiency in large numbers, while cards lose approximately 50%. As we can see in the graph, cards become superior to trade cogs once you and your allies use more than about 43 trade units, so much sooner than on giant maps. Before we get to trade routes covering only half the edge of a map, I want to mention an observation I've made in some online games. I repeatedly had the feeling that land trade routes that don't exactly follow the tile grid of Age of Empires were more resistant to congestion effects. To me it appeared that trade cards tend to use varying routes if the markets aren't exactly within the same columns or rows of the tile grid, while they seem to always use the same direct route when the markets are exactly within the same columns or rows of the tile grid. Of course, it could be advantageous if trade cards use randomly varying routes instead of always the direct route, because that might prevent many collisions among them. To test this assumption, I repeated the trade card tests, but this time I shifted one of the markets by 4 tiles to move it out of the same columns of the tile grid. As we know from our distance formula, this shift doesn't change the result of the D value, and hence it also doesn't change the gold we get per trip. In practice, a single trade card now even takes a bit longer for one round trip, because for some reason it visits unfavorable spots of the 2 markets. However, if we look at the test results, we can see that now trade cards in large numbers are indeed much more insusceptible against congestion. It's true that if there are few trade cards in the trade route, the direct route is better because of the slightly shorter way in practice. But if there are more than 22 trade cards on tiny maps or more than 35 on giant maps, shifting the markets is superior. And with very large numbers of trade cards, the superiority becomes very significant. With 120 trade cards on giant maps, slightly shifting the markets increases their efficiency by 12.6%. And with 120 trade cards on tiny maps, slightly shifting the markets increases their efficiency by even 25.3%. So if you're massively using trade cards in a match, always avoid having the markets within the same column of the tile grid. Theoretically, the same rule should apply to trade cogs on very open water maps like Mediterranean as well, but in reality on most maps the trade cogs will travel very close to the shoreline anyway, and the shape of the shore will determine where you have to build your dock. Now we run the same tests but with trade routes covering only half of the edge of the map. Of course, the gold generation rates are much lower now. Due to the reduced space available in the trade route, congestion becomes an even greater issue, and hence trade cogs, which are more prone to congestion, fall behind cards much faster now. On giant maps, trade cards are superior once there are more than 41 trade units. On tiny maps, cards are already superior to trade cogs once there are more than 22 trade units. Furthermore, on tiny maps, when using trade cogs, it can even happen that a deadlock occurs and the whole trade route is blocked until you interfere. I haven't run the tests with shifted markets in this setting with shorter trade routes, but with less space, shifting the markets should become even more important. Okay, now let's have a look at the gold generation rates of mining. When I was making this video, I was expecting that mining is always faster and hence better than trading, meaning that you should always mine as long as gold mines are available to you. But it turned out that this isn't true in all cases. Firstly, ignoring civilizations with bonuses, we have to distinguish between civilizations that have access to gold shaft mining and civilizations that don't. Secondly, when mining gold, in most cases there are some blocking or pathfinding issues among the villagers, and hence I don't take the theoretically optimal gold mining rates, which are available on different websites like Age of Empires fandom in case you're interested, but I've run tests to find out the actual gold mining rates with medium-sized gold mines and 2 villagers per gold mine. Here the mining results are displayed by the 2 black lines. We can see that even with gold shaft mining, trade cogs on long trade routes are significantly faster in producing gold than gold miners, as long as there aren't more than 16 trade cogs on tiny maps or 38 trade cogs on giant maps in the same trade route. If your civilization doesn't have access to gold shaft mining, trade cogs are superior to gold miners as long as there aren't more than 28 trade cogs on tiny maps or 63 trade cogs on giant maps using the same trade route. For trade cards it's a bit different, because as we know, single trade cards are significantly slower in producing gold than trade cogs, but they are also much more resistant to congestion. As a result, we can see that in long trade routes on giant maps, trade cards are generating gold with a speed comparable to gold miners without gold shaft mining, even if there are a lot of trade cards using the same trade route. Of course, when having very large numbers of cards like 120 using the same route, they fall behind gold miners, but as a rough approximation we can say long land trade routes on giant maps are as efficient as mining gold without gold shaft mining. But as we know, always remember to slightly shift your markers. For trade cards on tiny maps it's a different story, since the congestion effects are much stronger here, so they significantly fall behind gold miners very quickly when using more than just a few. If we have a short trade route, in our example one that is only covering half of the edge of the map, neither trade cards nor trade cogs can compete against gold miners. No matter which setting we choose, it's not even close. This again illustrates the importance of always trying to cover the whole edge of a map when establishing trade routes. Now let's cover the next way of generating gold, selling other resources. Since it rarely happens that there is enough stone on the map to constantly sell it for gold, we will just cover two scenarios. In scenario 1, there is plenty of wood on the map, so all of our villages are lumberjacks and we sell the wood they produce. In scenario 2, there isn't much wood on the map, so in order to avoid quickly running out of wood, 90% of our villages are farmers and 10% of our villages are lumberjacks who produce the wood for the farms. We sell all the food the villagers produce and the rest of the wood that wasn't used to reseed farms. Regarding further test settings, for both scenarios we expect late game market prices of 17 gold per 100 food and 17 gold per 100 wood. We also expect the guilds, crop rotation and two-man saw technologies to be available to avoid too many special cases. So remember, if your civilization doesn't have access to one or several of these technologies, selling resources for gold will be less effective. Here the results of the two scenarios, selling wood or selling mainly food, are displayed by the two purple lines. We can see that the gold generation rates per villager are incredibly slow compared to all mining and most trading scenarios. Only short and insanely crowded trade routes on tiny maps are comparably slow. While that shouldn't be much of a surprise for anyone, let's compare it with another way of generating gold, which is only available to the Portuguese. The Feitoria is a Portuguese unique building that constantly produces resources of all 4 types. It costs 250 gold and 250 stone and 20 population space. Because this video is all about gold generation rates, we will count all resources the Feitoria produces per minute, keep the gold and sell the food, wood and stone for gold. Then we inspect how much gold we got and divide it by 20 because of the 20 population space the Feitoria needs. Just as in the previous scenario in which we sold food and wood at the market, we assume that 100 food is worth 17 gold and 100 wood is also worth 17 gold because these are the common late game market exchange rates. However, the stone price can vary strongly. If we assume a selling price of 150 gold for 100 stone, which implies a buying price of 203 gold per 100 stone, we get a gold generation rate of 98.73 gold that the Feitoria produces per minute. We divide that by 20 and get 4.936 gold per minute per population space for the Feitoria, which is displayed by the grey dotted line. So as we see, Feitorias are even worse in generating gold than farmers or lumberjacks who sell their food and wood for gold. Even if we expect extremely high stone prices, for example selling 100 stone for 350 gold, which implies a buying price of 474 gold per 100 stone, or without guilds 535 gold per 100 stone, the gold generated by a Feitoria per minute is still only 143.73. Divided by 20, this is 7.1865, and hence the lumberjacks selling their wood are still faster in generating gold than the Feitoria. The last way of generating gold is collecting relics. One relic generates 45 gold per minute, which is very fast compared to all other ways of generating gold, as displayed by the grey line. And what's even better, they don't need population space. 2 relics offer approximately the same gold generation rate in the late game as one Feitoria, but as mentioned, the latter one costs us 250 gold, 250 stone, and by far most importantly, 20 population space. It doesn't make much sense to discuss and compare relics any further because they don't need population space, which makes them awesome in every situation. Just always collect as many as you can. A few other observations I've made during the tests include: all ships of the Berbers are moving 10% faster, but their trade cogs produce approximately 10% less gold per trip. One could expect this leads to similar gold generation rates, but that's not always the case. A faster movement speed means that more collisions happen among trade units. However, it does not mean that the time is reduced that stuck trade units need to find a new way around each other. We can see this effect when looking at the dotted lines displaying the Berbers' gold income rates for trade cogs. In crowded trade routes, their gold income rates are evidently worse than the rates of generic civilizations. The same should apply for the Tri-dock technology, which for most civilizations is available in the dock in the Imperial Age. Researching it increases the speed of all ships, including trade cogs, but it reduces the trade cogs gold generated per trip. I haven't run tests here, but in practice the effect should be the same as the Berbers' civilization bonus. So when using trade cogs, don't research Tri-dock, unless it's absolutely necessary for your navy. In case you're interested, here you can see the same gold graph with a few more lines, displaying gold generation rates for some civs with bonuses in this area. Alright, that's been everything I found out about obtaining gold in AoE 2. I hope I was able to provide a deep insight into everything related to this noble metal. Have a nice day and see you next time.